Andrew Neil, you've done Sunday morning politics, you've done weekday lunchtime politics, you tried, albeit quite briefly, weekday evening politics. Why Sunday evening politics? And how will this new show be different to all the ones before?
But you missed out late night politics on a Thursday night.
Oh, that's true. Late night politics. You have literally done them all. It's the only slot left.
Probably the best rated show of them all. So well rated that the BBC wouldn't give it a better shot in the schedules than 11:30 at night. Some nights we went on so late, I thought we were going to be the lead into breakfast television, but that's another story. The 6 o'clock time slot on a Sunday is unusual for British political news, current affairs broadcasting, but that's what makes it a plus. It means that we've got that space to ourselves. There are no competitors. There are plenty of points in the TV and radio schedule which are crowded with news shows. We get this to ourselves, and it turns out it's a pivotal point in the week because, as you know, Sunday newspapers are an important part of the British news cycle. They are now followed by the Sunday morning television and radio shows, which add to that news cycle. So my idea will be to pick up off the back of that. So we know what's in the Sunday papers. We know how the Sunday shows have treated them. And by early Sunday evening, we'll have a pretty good idea of how the Monday papers are going to throw the story on. So it puts us in a pretty good position to look back at the week, sweep that up, get done what's been done, and then look forward to the upcoming week.
It's a good point you make. The news junkies on a Sunday morning, there's loads of it around, but this weekend you're up against the BAFTAs, Planet Earth, the Chase Celebrity Special, and the film School of Rock. So if you're into the news, this is the right sort of place to be. I suppose, who have you got on? Can you tell me who your first guest is?
No, I can't yet. We're keeping that quiet for the moment, I'm afraid. What we've decided to do, though, is that we are only going to do major interviews with major political figures. One of the reasons in the end I stopped doing the Sunday politics on BBC One was that we were only getting the Minister for paperclips. And it was just not worth the candle, frankly. And so if we're offered the Minister for paperclips, we're going to say no. I would rather have intelligent discussion among well-informed, serious commentators. And the two we have on Sunday are Madeline Grant from the Telegraph and Pippa Crerar from the Mirror. They'll be joining me for the launch show, and I hope joining me in a number of weeks in the 10-week run that we have. We've got a big, well-known name lined up, but I just need to nail it down for sure. For some reason, politicians are a bit apprehensive about coming on the shows that I do. So I just want to make sure we've got them before I go public on it. But my point is that I'm not allowing the politicians to hold us hostage. I think what I discovered with Abbott and Portillo on this week, and with the podcast that I'm doing now for Tortoise, and as we did with Spectator TV too during the lockdown, people, rather than having a second-rate minister coming on with just talking points to regurgitate and reiterate, they'd rather have really well-informed analysis of what's going on from journalists who know their stuff. So that's what we do, unless we get a big name.
And it was interesting, you mentioned the podcast, so this is the David Petraeus one, and having someone who has been there and done that, but is out of it now with the freedom to actually say what he really thinks and be a bit more self-reflective. You're right, it's much better than having a middle-ranking minister who isn't going to say anything.
And it requires a different kind of interview from the ones that I'm most done or most associated with, which is the robust holding ministers to account, or holding people who want to run us to account. With someone like General Petraeus or Fiona Hill, the woman from the north of England who ended up advising 3 US presidents on Russia, rather than kind of holding them to account, because they're not in power now, it's a more conversational style. It's trying to elicit information from them. What's it like in the Kremlin? How do you read the performance of the Russian troops in Ukraine as a general who has been in Iraq and Afghanistan and so on? That's a less robust. Not to mean we don't kind of push them, but it's a more conversational, more an interview designed to try and get information out of people rather than show up, which we sometimes do, and rightly to do it, that they don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Does that mean you're going soft, or you've had to change your approach?
Oh, I've been soft in the head for years. No, I think look, it's different horses for different courses. You know, not every interview has to be or should be a sort of Paxman-esque thrashing. You know, there's the place for that, and believe me, I've done it. I think it was my most famous interview of all times, the career most famous, is one that never happened with Mr. Johnson in the 2019 general election of December that year. And I think the reason he wanted to avoid it was first of all, he hadn't done too well when I interviewed him for the Tory leadership contest previously. And then he'd seen the kind of interviews I'd done with Jeremy Corbyn and with Nicola Sturgeon. But not every interview needs to be like that. And I think when you speak to a General Petraeus or a Fiona Hill or figures like that, you change the technique a bit. You're not really holding them to account. You're trying for the listener or the viewer, as you do in your show, to get the best of their expertise. After all, that's why people are listening. They're not listening because it's you or me. They're listening because we are interviewing someone who knows what they're talking about. And the listener or the viewer want to hear what they have to say.
Do you think, and when we did the series on the Sunday shows, there was a bit of a divide in the people I spoke to. There was some, I think there was a little bit of rose-tinted glasses. It was all better in the good old days when everyone answered every question and fully engaged and gave an honest response. Do you think there has been a shift in the politicians, the caliber or the character of the politicians you've been interviewing? I mean, you're someone who wants to do in-depth, long-form interviews, but the political culture now is very shallow and short-termist.
Well, there were no good old days for a start. And, Sunday morning political shows are a relatively new procedure in British broadcasting. I mean, in America, they go way back to the early 1950s. I mean, the longest running Sunday morning political show in the world is Meet the Press on NBC, which I think has been running from the early 50s. We didn't start it till Weekend World, started by ITV, like most major innovations. People don't realize this. Most major innovations in news did not come from the BBC, wonderful institution that it is. It actually came from ITV or from Sky. The first half-hour ever news broadcast, that was ITN, not the BBC. Presenters on air who actually reading the news. Who would have thought that was a good idea? That was ITV. Until then, the BBC read the news against cards, against pictures, and so on. And it was ITV that introduced the Sunday morning show. And of course, it was Weekend World was the most famous of that. And Brian Walden made his name there. He had the time to do it, the setup to do it as well. I would say, nevertheless, that it's tougher put it this way, Matt, there are fewer and fewer front rank politicians with whom it is worth doing a long, in-depth interview. I mean, I'm afraid on both front benches for the moment, the talent just isn't there in depth. There are talented people around Boris Johnson and around Keir Starmer, but it's not there in depth. You only have to look at both front benches to see that, or look at, no need to be partisan about this at all. Look at the quality of Margaret Thatcher's cabinets and look at the quality of Tony Blair's cabinets as well. I mean, you take the Blair cabinet in 1997, I don't think one of them had been in government before, certainly not in the major positions, but they were of a high quality. People felt they were able to run the country, and they were. You interviewed Jack Straw, or John Reid, Gordon Brown, David Blunkett, need I go on? You don't have many people up there of that caliber. And so therefore, you're right, it makes that long form interview steeped in fact, holding people to account, tougher to do, which is why, unless we get the people of caliber on the Andrew Neil show, I'm not going to do it.
Why do you think the caliber's gone down? Is it because we treat politicians so badly? Is it because they've, MPs' expenses, the shenanigans over Brexit, the abuse on social media, all of that? it's a strange sort of person who'd go into politics now, isn't it?
I mean, I think there are times when we do treat politicians badly or unnecessarily so. I mean, I watched the sort of backlash that occurred only in the last couple of days because the Prime Minister didn't know who Lorraine was. You know, of course we know who Lorraine is, and she's a national treasure. She happens to come from the same part of the country I do, so that makes her a double national treasure as well. But it is not the end of the world because the Prime Minister doesn't know the name of a daytime TV star. I speak as a former daytime presenter. You know, it's not the end of the world if a high politician doesn't know who we are. So I think sometimes we're a little stupid on that. But I think the other reason is that, you know, it used to be, I mean, first of all, this is kind of a serious point, that up until the 60s, most politicians and indeed, I think nearly all prime ministers up until the mid-60s had been bloodied by war. They had been in the trenches like Harold Macmillan, or they had fought against the Nazis like Ted Heath and Denis Healey. Clem Attlee, Prime Minister after the war, was medevaced twice out of Gallipoli in World War I, Major Attlee, as he was often called. These people had seen the worst. They'd seen the kind of things that are currently happening in Ukraine. And I think that gave them a seriousness of purpose, and I think it also gave them a status, regardless of their politics. That generation has come and gone. Probably the Thatcher cabinet with Lord Carrington and Willie Whitelaw and so on was the last of that. And then we moved on more to and so what could then happen was that you could have a career elsewhere, like Peter Walker in the City, or like numerous Labour ministers who became Labour ministers in trade unions, doing wage negotiations, looking after workers' conditions, and then move into politics. We've kind of professionalized now and made a career of politics. So you almost know, it's almost compulsory that you've been to university. Actually, correct that, been to one particular university. Correct that, been to one or two colleges in that particular university. You come out, mummy and daddy are usually reasonably well heeled, so you can take an internship somewhere in a think tank in Westminster for peanuts or for nothing. You can then work your way up to a job as a special advisor. You challenge a seat that you lose, you get in second time, and you're on the slippery pole on the way up. You have first mover advantage. I'm thinking of the likes of the two Miliband brothers, George Osborne, Nick Clegg, all these kind of names. It's much harder to now come in because these people have first mover advantage. And I think that unnecessarily filters the available talent. You're not really made welcome if you try and come in from the outside in your late 30s or 40s.
If you were offered, and I don't know who you've got on Saturday, but if it was, you know, Keir Starmer or Boris Johnson say they'll come on, does that fill you with excitement or a sense of dread?
Both. I think excitement because, you know, you've got the biggest name in the Conservative Party, or as an alternative, the biggest name in the Labour Party. Actually, Keir Starmer wouldn't fill me with dread because that'd be a more typical interview. I just do my homework and try and hold him to account on various issues and try to understand what he really stands for, because most of what he stood for to get elected as Labour leader, he no longer stands for. When I interviewed him when he was running for Labour leadership, he was doing so pretty much on a straight Corbynite ticket. Yeah. Well, where has that gone? That'd be interesting to see. Boris Johnson would fill me more with dread too, because so much would be hanging on it. There will be people out there not content unless I get up out of the desk, walk round and smash his head on the table. That's the kind of stupidity that you get on social media these days, that you're not being tough enough unless you do that. And he is really difficult to interview. As we saw with Susanna on Good Morning Britain, he has that old, what in America they call the filibuster. Just play for time. I ask you about oranges. Well, let me tell you about apples, because I've got a lot of apples to tell you about. And he's ticking down the clock. And you have to interrupt. You have to get stuck in. You have to stop that. Otherwise, it becomes a monologue. But in doing so, people then say, oh, you're rude. You didn't let him speak. You didn't let him talk. So it's a difficult tightrope to maneuver. But hell, would you want to do it? That's why we're here. Of course we would.
So this new show, how do you think it ranks against everything you've done before? And do you hope that this is going to sort of draw a line under the GB News experience?
Well, I've already drawn a line under the GB News, and I think GB News has already drawn a line under me. So we can move on to that. It's I mean, it's a year from when we were building up to the launch of GB News, and it was a terrible time. I could see the writing on the wall. Where are we now? Early May. I could see it actually in April, and I tried to articulate that, but nobody would listen. I approached this in a far different mood. I mean, I've got a studio with lights, a microphone that works, a beautiful set, fantastic production team. Though I have to say, the production team at GB News are very good. It wasn't their fault. It looked the way it did. I don't know where it ranks. If it's a huge failure, then it'll be a small blip. I was never on Channel 4. What did you think of that? How did you manage to work that out? If it's a great success, then obviously it's far more important to me than GB News. We're going to give it our all. It's a chance to do something a bit different. I hope we can, you've brought humor to politics. I think sometimes we don't know enough of it. But these are serious times, and so we have to be serious, but it doesn't mean to say we can't crack a smile as well. I was very amused at the, with all this expenses scandal. I mean, in addition to Mr. Johnson not knowing who Lorraine was, we've had memories back of the expenses scandal recently from France now, where
yes.
A member of the National Assembly, the French Assembly, France's parliament, has been claiming her lingerie on expenses. So, we can have a bit of fun.
Yeah, that makes, what was it, John Prescott's loose seat pale in comparison, really, lingerie.
Yes, exactly.
And given everything you've been doing, what, half a century now you've been doing journalism of one kind or another, is editing a Fleet Street newspaper still does anything compare to that in terms of sort of influence and fun and power and control, or have those days gone now, do you think?
Well, those days might have gone, but when I was doing it, I was editor of the Sunday Times from 1983 to the end of 1994, 11 years. And there is nothing to compare to being editor of a well-resourced, well-recognized, prestigious newspaper, like the Sunday Times, along with the New York Times Sunday edition, the two best known Sunday newspapers in the world. And in these days, with incredible resources, entirely separate from the Times.
Yeah.
We had our own bureaus across the world, all our own separate editorial team. There was very little linkage with the Times because the economics in the days didn't demand it. When I left the Sunday Times, it was making £1 million a week. That's a lot of money for a paper coming out one day a week, 16 pages of classified jobs advertising. All of that allowed me. I remember, I think it was 1984, there were huge events in Lebanon and in Libya. Ronald Reagan had dispatched troops. They got blown up, if you remember. There were scores of Marines dead. I mean, I was deploying 8 reporters here, 5 reporters there, photographers there, getting models made, cartography. You just covered it. Not that money didn't matter when you're working for Rupert Murdoch, but we had the money. We had the money to do it. And people took notice. You had the ability to move the dial, to shift. When we revealed the secrets of Israel's nuclear arsenal, that was a global story that resonated around the globe. Indeed, the Israeli Secret Service, Mossad, ended up kidnapping our main source for that story. So no, nothing compares with that. That was undoubtedly the great 11 years of my life.
Do you think now we have a sort of political news sort of overload? It's everywhere all the time, but it's all a bit the same. Morning, noon, and night, you could be watching political programs of one, and an explosion of channels, GB News, Talk TV, You know, Sky News are doing these sort of big interview programs as well. Is it too much of it?
There is probably too much of it at the moment, and that's partly because the technology allows it to happen.
Yeah.
You know, there are so many platforms. I first cottoned on to this as to how you can repurpose the same content for all these different platforms. About 3 years ago, I did a long interview with Malcolm Turnbull, the former Prime Minister of Australia, an old friend of mine, because we had fought the battle to publish Spycatcher together. He had been the QC to get it published in Sydney, and he helped us when the government tried to put me in jail for publishing it in this country. So we did that long interview. We actually, in the end, because we didn't know, we were so enjoying the interview, it lasted for 40 minutes. So what do? It was a pre-record. So what we did was we sliced and diced that interview into little chunks of 90 seconds to 2 minutes and put it out on digital platforms. We then edited it down to 20 minutes and put it out to broadcast television. We then put the whole 40 minutes on the web, which allowed people who wanted to see it all to see it. But it was also a test of our ethics, that people could see that we hadn't taken the 40 minutes and edited the 20 down in a way that distorted what had actually happened. And I think that's a wonderful way of doing it. It's horses for courses. If you've only got a 90-second appetite for Malcolm Turnbull and me, take it. If you've got the 40 minutes, take it. Now, that allows us to do all sorts of things. What will happen is it will be winnowed out. We're seeing broadcasters take advantage of the platforms. Talk TV, GB News, Times Radio, doing news shows. They now realize that in a world of streaming, news is the one thing networks can still do that streamers don't do. And it's the thing that still rates big in America, up against the streamers. Drama, not so much. Documentary, not so much either. But news can be done. The market will sort it out. Over time, people will go to what they like, what they trust, what they want to hear. And people who are doing it now that don't have the luck or the competence to attract that, they'll go out of business or they'll pare back what they're doing. Hey, listen, we're journalists. We should take advantage of this plethora.
I know, it's a good time.
As long as we can, because it won't always be there.
Yeah, it's a good time. It's a good time. Just finally then, with your show, your guest on Sunday to On Site, who's your dream guest that you'd like to interview? And actually, even maybe somebody who's not alive, someone who you'd always like to have gone toe to toe with.
Well, obviously, getting the Prime Minister would be our dream guest in the current environment.
Yeah,
we're shooting for it. I'm not holding my breath, or I might suffocate. But he did Good Morning Britain in the past couple of days, so who knows, Matt? He might do. Who would I would love to have interviewed JFK.
Yeah,
when you look back at the stature of someone like him, then that's the kind of person that would have been great to interview. And almost any American president in a way, because they are so important, not just to America, but to the rest of the world, particularly on this side of the Atlantic. They're so important. Donald Trump would be hard to say no to. I've met him several times, but I've never interviewed him. Again, I would treat that with some dread, but how could you say no?
Well, Andrew Neil, I'm glad that you said yes and could join us. Thanks. So, in fact, best of luck with the show on Sunday. It's the Andrew Neil Show, 6 o'clock on Channel 4 on Sunday night. But Andrew Neil, thanks so much for joining us on Times Radio.
Matt, you're very kind, and I love your radio show too. And the road show is fantastic. I may have to steal one or two of your jokes if you don't mind.
You're very welcome to them. Very welcome. Andrew, really good to see you. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye.